And you've correctly assumed, Professor, that President Biden's environmental policy is a huge step up from Donald Trump's. But you've also correctly assessed that it doesn't go far enough, given the impending existential and ecological disaster that is climate change. And because of our corrupt campaign finance system, which essentially allows fossil fuel companies to fund and influence our politicians and legislation, there's a lack of will from either the Democrat or Republican parties to end our industrial fossil fuel addiction. Given the nature of the two-party system, which will likely just keep taking one step forward and 1 to 2 steps backwards every time a Republican wins the White House, what's your message to environmental activists who feel that the approach of groups like the Sunrise Movement doesn't go nearly far enough? And do you have any comment on the green anarchist or the anarcho-primitivist schools of thought, which suggest a complete rejection of and resistance to industrial corporate capitalism, which would be necessary to save the environment in their perspective?
Well, let's start with the last. Whatever you think of green anarcho anti-capitalism, it's irrelevant. I mean, we can put aside the question whether this is a feasible or sensible move. Let's put that aside. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that it would be a good thing. It's irrelevant. The chance, just take a look at time scales. The time scale relevant to dealing with the threatening environmental catastrophe is a couple of decades. There aren't going to be radical institutional changes in a couple of decades. This is true even for what, in my view, are more sensible approaches, moving to significantly change the nature of the state capitalist system. I think that could be feasible. I think it would be a good thing. It's not relevant to the climate crisis. The time scale involved in doing that is beyond the point where we would have passed irreversible tipping points and the game would essentially be over. So the fact of the matter is that the climate crisis must be addressed within the framework of existing institutions, modifying them, changing this and that, but there aren't going to be fundamental changes in time. That's just a fact about the world. I haven't mentioned what I think about this solution, but frankly, not much of it, not much, but it really doesn't matter. Now, what should we be doing? First of all, it's not quite true, as people say, that there's a two-party system. There's a centrist party, the Democrats, and there's what's been called a radical insurgency, which has lost any semblance of being a political party. You can see that it's pretty frank, in fact. When Obama came into office, Mitch McConnell, the most important figure in the Republican Party, said straight out, our task when Obama is president is to make sure that he can do nothing. That's not a political party. That's something different. It's a loud voice for private power and private wealth and saying nothing else matters. If we have to wreck the country to achieve our power, so be it. When Biden came into office, same story. Goal is block everything. We already have seen that. Take, say, the first stimulus, almost $2 trillion stimulus. A large majority of the population supports it, including Republicans. Most of the people in Congress think it's a good idea, including the Republicans. 100% vote against it. 100%. Doesn't matter what you think. Party orders, we're kind of a caricature of the old Communist Party. Orders come from the top, from the Central Committee. We obey slavishly. Our job is to serve private wealth and corporate power, period, and block anything that prevents our coming back into power. Okay, that's not a two-party system. It's been, the Republican Party's been moving in this direction since Reagan actually still had a semblance of a political party at the time. Changed with Newt Gingrich, changed again with Mitch McConnell. So that's the situation we face. There's one functioning party. It's going to hit a wall of opposition no matter what it does until they can get themselves back into power and continue the wreckage of the Trump period, which will probably put us to an end. That's the situation. Now, what can be done with the Democratic Party? Here, there's a split. Let's take climate. It's very interesting to see what's happening. Biden's program on climate is not good enough, but it's better, much better than anything that preceded. That's not because of a religious conversion. It's because of the activism of a wide range of people, most of them young, dedicated activism. Sunrise Movement, which you mentioned, carried things very far forward when they occupied Nancy Pelosi's office, got support from Ocasio-Cortez, others who came in on the Sanders wave, Ed Markey, senior Massachusetts senator who's been involved and interested in environment. They succeeded in moving some notion of Green New Deal from the fringe, where it was ridiculed, if even mentioned, to the center of the legislative agenda. It's a big step, not a complete step, but a long one. You take a look at, and it shows Biden climate policy. Now there's a battle going on. The party managers, the Clintonite, Wall Street oriented, centrist party managers whose conception of the party is a party of Wall Street and the affluent professionals and so on. They don't want this. And they're holding back. You could see it right through the presidential campaign. If you looked at the Democratic Party website, as I was doing regularly, there was a switch on climate up to a certain point, say roughly late August. It was Biden's program. And then it disappeared. Not on the inside, but you can guess. Party managers probably didn't want it. That's not Wall Street's. And that battle's going on. Now, one side doesn't stop. Those who own the place and run it, they are in a relentless class war. They never stop for a minute. The question is, will the activists continue? If they do, they can make a difference, as they have already. You look at Biden's program, it does call for what is needed, namely ending fossil fuel use by mid-century, which means taking significant steps right now. However, the means by which it calls for doing this are the ones that benefit the fossil fuel companies, the banks, and so on, namely by hoping to create means, new technological means to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Well, there's nothing wrong with working on that, but that's not what's needed. What's needed is ending the use of fossil fuels. Fossil fuel, like ExxonMobil now, is presenting itself as a green company. Trust us, we're going to do it for you. How are we going to do it for you? By maximizing the use of fossil fuels and funding some long-term project to get it out of the atmosphere after we've poisoned it. Okay, as I said, it's worth working on that, but that's not the issue. It has to stop using it. Meanwhile, if you take a look at what's happening with the oil prices going up, the fracking industry's getting back into the game, And they're making use of the Trump destruction of regulations. So they're not burning off methane when it comes out, pouring it into the atmosphere, sharply increasing. That's a death sentence. It's it's not as long term as carbon dioxide, but it's much more dangerous in the short term. And they know how to stop it, but it's just you don't make enough profit that way. Okay, if that's what's going to drive policy, we're finished. It's not necessary. There are feasible means to deal with it, but it's going to take a lot of hard work internal to the Democratic Party. Now, the Republicans aren't lost. If you look at younger Republicans, millennials so-called, they're sort of moving towards moderate sanity on this issue, and they can be reached, and other segments can be reached. So it's not a lost cause. One shouldn't give up on it, but I think we should face the reality of the situation, and we should put aside ideas that are right or wrong, out of range of the kind of thing that has to be done. To solve this problem essentially within the framework of existing institutions, which is not impossible. That doesn't mean you stop trying to change the institutions. It's parallel action.